I died 9 times before I learned not to trust anyone, and yet this 10th time, I'm the one kneeling down to take the hand of the man who once signed my termination papers without a second thought. For 9 lifetimes, I was always the last to learn the truth. This time, I remember everything, every name that will betray me, every moment the knife will land in my back. But there's one thing my memory never warned me about. Among the 4 men I planned to use to survive, one of them would blur the line between calculation and something real. And on the very rooftop where I let go 9 times before, the one behind it all is waiting, certain that this 10th time, I'll fall exactly the same way. The wind on the company rooftop cut cold, whipping at my jacket. 18 floors below, the traffic looked like scattered specks of light, small and lost. I stood at the edge, both hands gripping the railing until my knuckles went white. There was nothing left to lose. The company had fired me, my bank account was empty, and every person I'd once trusted had turned their back. I tilted my face to the sky and let out a dry laugh. Ridiculous, really, not even death could stop anyone from walking away. Before I let go, every face flashed through my mind one by one. Chen Mu, the friend I trusted most, was the one who leaked confidential files to a rival. Zhu Yan laughed in front of the whole company when I was falsely accused. Gu Zi stood by and watched it all happen without a word. And Lu Heng, the one I'd hoped in the most, signed my termination without a moment's hesitation. 4 people, 4 blades. I closed my eyes, not wanting to remember anymore. My hand slipped off the railing. The wind roared in my ears, the sound of car horns below fading until it vanished completely. Everything blurred past too fast to register, just the sky spinning above me. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Just an emptiness spreading from my chest, then a pitch-black darkness slowly swallowing every sense. Even the wind went silent. My consciousness flickered out midair without a sound, without anyone knowing. Bright sunlight cut through the curtains and jolted me awake. The familiar ceiling, the old alarm clock on the desk, the wall calendar still showing the date from exactly 1 year ago. I sat up fast, my heart pounding. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the unmistakable rhythm of being alive. This wasn't a dream. Every memory from my previous life, down to the moment I fell from that rooftop, was still intact in my mind. I sat still on the bed for a long time, trying to piece everything together. This was the first morning of the fateful year, the day every tragedy began. I still remembered every small detail of what was coming. I took a deep breath and got up. This time would be different. I would never again be the naive fool who trusted anyone blindly. I arrived at the office right on time, walking through the familiar lobby. Chen Mu was already waiting by the elevator, wearing that same friendly smile, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early. Grab breakfast with me. I already got your favorite." I looked at that face, an odd feeling rising in my chest. In my last life, this exact person had quietly sold me out without a shred of mercy, driving me straight into a dead end. I still smiled and took the coffee, playing along as if I knew nothing, quietly memorizing every flicker of Chen Mu's expression. During lunch, I ran into Zhu Yan in the hallway. Zhu Yan glanced at me, that familiar mocking tone creeping in. "Heard your project missed its target again this month." I didn't fire back the way I used to. I just held his gaze, stayed silent for a few seconds, then answered flatly, "We'll see." Zhu Yan froze for a moment, caught off guard by the unfamiliar reaction. At the afternoon meeting, I saw Lu Heng for the first time in this life. Lu Heng sat at the head of the table, his cold gaze sweeping over everyone present, never lingering long on anyone. When his eyes passed over me, I felt that same aching indifference I remembered too well. In my last life, those same eyes had watched me sign my termination without a flicker of hesitation. After the meeting, I deliberately stayed behind in the office alone. I grabbed a pen and paper and started listing every major event I remembered in order. Who would betray me first when each blow would land? I remembered it all with painful clarity. My pen stopped on the last line, 4 names. I circled all 4, the corner of my mouth curling up. Late that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my small, rented room, staring straight at myself. This time, I wouldn't wait to die again. I would use everything I already knew to flip the board, one person at a time. I gave my reflection a faint smile. The loop had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it twice. That night, I sat in my room and laid out a sheet of notes. I began listing every major event in chronological order, exactly as my previous life's memory had preserved it. The project leak next month, Zhu Yan's public humiliation mid-month, and every time Lu Heng had coldly cut me out of important decisions. I underlined the first line, the document leak. That would be the first move I'd block, since it was the opening domino for everything that followed. I folded the paper and locked it away in a drawer. The next morning, I changed the passwords on every project file, claiming it was a routine security check. I also quietly added a two-factor layer only I controlled, while deliberately leaving an outdated copy of the project in plain sight on the shared computer. I glanced at Chen Mu browsing near my desk, his eyes lingering on the fake copy for a few seconds. I bowed my head to hide a small smile and kept typing as if nothing were happening. 3 days later, news of a project leak spread through the company, except the content that got out was completely wrong compared to the real file. Chen Mu stood in the meeting room, visibly pale as the higher-ups grilled him. His eyes flicked toward me for a moment, full of suspicion. I kept my expression calm, shrugging slightly as if just as surprised as everyone else. I knew exactly why his familiar plan had gone completely off track. Chen Mu came to my desk right after the meeting, voice laced with forced concern. "Did you hear about the leak? Whoever did that went too far." I looked up, eyes wide with carefully staged surprise. "Really? I just heard too, can't believe it." I played along with fake worry, even tossing back a few questions to test his reaction. Chen Mu studied me for a while before finally relaxing, seemingly convinced by the innocence I put on. The quarterly review meeting followed shortly after, with the entire leadership team in attendance. Zhu Yan stood up to speak, deliberately weaving the leak into his presentation, his eyes cutting toward me with obvious mockery. Makes you wonder if certain people just don't manage things carefully enough. The room went quiet, eyes turning to me. I clenched my hand under the table but kept my face composed, giving nothing away. I stood up and pulled up my laptop right there, without a flicker of hesitation. I laid out every piece of evidence I'd already prepared, one by one. File access logs, edit histories, and a comparison showing the leaked document didn't match the original I managed at all. Zhu Yan's face went pale, stammering for a comeback but finding no opening. The room buzzed with murmurs. I closed my laptop and sat back down, met with a mix of admiration and scrutiny from those around me. After the meeting, I caught Lu Heng's gaze lingering on me a beat longer than usual. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod before turning and leaving with his entourage. I stood there watching his back, an unfamiliar feeling stirring inside me. In my last life, I'd never once received a look like that from Lu Heng, not even in the moments I needed recognition the most. That afternoon, I was summoned to Lu Heng's private office to submit an additional report. The door opened to reveal a young man in a sharp suit standing by the desk, introducing himself as Gu Zi, Lu Heng's new personal assistant. Gu Zi smiled warmly and poured me a cup of tea before I could even speak. "You've had a rough day. Sit, rest for a moment." I took the cup and nodded my thanks, but a vague sense of caution stirred inside me for no clear reason. While waiting for Lu Heng to finish a call, I studied Gu Zi from the corner of my eye. He carried himself flawlessly, every gesture measured, every word kept at exactly the right, polite distance. I tossed out a few casual questions about his previous work, but every answer came back smooth, without a single crack. I filed that feeling away. Someone this perfect, this harmless, sometimes that's exactly the person worth watching most closely. On the way home that night, I stopped by the roadside, watching the crowd pass by. The document leak hadn't unfolded the way it had in my last life. Chen Mu had been suspected sooner than expected, and Lu Heng was already looking at me in a completely different way. Everything was drifting off the path I once knew by heart. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to be more careful. My past life memory was now just a rough map, not a guaranteed answer for every step ahead. That weekend, Chen Mu invited me out to a familiar restaurant, his tone as natural as ever. It's been ages since we actually sat down and talked. Dinner? Chen Mu said, throwing an arm around my shoulder. I agreed without hesitation, fully aware this was a test. I smiled back. Sure, I've missed the food there too. I walked alongside him, deliberately letting myself look relaxed and unguarded. Over dinner, Chen Mu skillfully steered the conversation toward my recent relationship with Lu Heng. I acted shy, dropping a few half-true, half-fabricated details about an upcoming project I'd invented entirely for this purpose. I watched every flicker of expression cross his face as he took it in. Chen Mu nodded along, a faint glint flashing in his eyes if you weren't paying close attention. I knew this false information would soon make its way exactly where I intended. A few days later, I happened to overhear a conversation between Zhu Yan and Chen Mu in a quiet corner of the hallway. Zhu Yan lowered his voice. Just leave the company's side to me. You just need to hand over the information at the right time. Chen Mu nodded, his face more tense than usual. I pressed close to the wall, trying to catch more, but the two split apart quickly when someone walked by. Even that short exchange was enough. Zhu Yan and Chen Mu had already formed an alliance. I returned to my desk, my hands still slightly shaking from what I'd just overheard. I quietly cross-checked the false information I'd fed Chen Mu days earlier against what I'd just overheard. Everything matched perfectly, confirming the two of them were coordinating behind my back. I gripped my pen tighter, my gaze turning sharper. I hadn't expected the two traitors to team up this early in this life. That night, I sat with my old notes and added a few new lines about the alliance I just uncovered. I carefully weighed the order of priority. Zhu Yan had solid backing within the company, and Gu Zi remained an unknown I couldn't touch yet. Only Chen Mu, caught wavering between two sides, was the weakest link and the easiest to exploit right now. I circled Chen Mu's name once more, telling myself he'd be the first target I'd deal with for real. I started getting closer to Chen Mu on purpose, texting him every morning, occasionally stopping by his desk for small talk. One afternoon, Chen Mu laughed with me the exact same way he had for years, his eyes lighting up over some trivial story. In that moment, I almost forgot I was playing a part, my heart skipping an odd, unwelcome beat. I clenched my hand under the table, reminding myself why I was doing all this. But the warmth from that moment lingered, refusing to fade. 2 weeks passed, and Chen Mu's guard began visibly slipping in the way he talked. One afternoon, he mentioned offhand that he had to report some progress to someone up top before quickly changing the subject, a flash of awkwardness crossing his face. I pretended not to notice, carrying on with the conversation as if I'd heard nothing, but I filed that detail away clearly. Chen Mu was still in regular contact with someone above him, very possibly Zhu Yan. I decided to plant a more sophisticated piece of false information to test his loyalty for certain. I let it slip in conversation that I was about to be promoted to head a key project, emphasizing that it hadn't been officially announced yet, just quietly confirmed. Chen Mu acted thrilled for me, congratulating me over and over. But I noticed his fingers tighten around his phone without realizing it, a small reflex, but enough to confirm something was off. Just 2 days later, word of my upcoming promotion had already reached upper management before any official announcement had gone out. I was called in and asked where the rumor had come from, and of course I claimed to know nothing. But in my heart, I already had the answer. Chen Mu was the only person I'd told, and now the evidence had spoken for itself. There was no more doubt. He was still quietly funneling information to Zhu Yan, exactly as I'd predicted. I went back to my desk, trying to keep my face calm as if nothing had happened. Inside, a bitter feeling lingered, and it wasn't simply about being betrayed. Part of me still ached over the innocent friendship we'd once had, even knowing now it had never truly existed the way I'd believed. I pushed the feeling aside, reminding myself this wasn't the time to be weak. But that night, I still found myself staring at my phone for a long time before deleting the message I'd almost sent to Chen-mu. At lunch that day, I ran into Lu Heng in the cafeteria, a place he rarely showed up. He glanced at my face and asked directly, no hesitation. "Something wrong?" I was caught off guard by the sudden concern and shook my head quickly. "No, just a little tired." Lu Heng studied me for a few more seconds, didn't push further, gave a small nod, and walked off. I stood there watching him go, wondering why that look made it so hard to hold my composure. Later that afternoon, I was asked to stay behind to go over a report with Lu Heng, this time without Gu Zi present. The conversation started strictly on business, but gradually, Lu Heng asked a few questions outside of work, about how I'd been handling recent pressure. I answered more honestly than necessary, maybe because the room felt quiet and private. Lu Heng listened, nodding occasionally, his usual detached expression noticeably softer than before. A few days later, Chen-mu started watching me differently, his eyes lingering longer whenever I did something unexpected. "You've changed a lot lately," Chen-mu said, half joking over lunch. Hiding something from me, I laughed it off, feigning surprise. "Changed how? You're overthinking it." I quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, but I knew clearly his suspicion was growing by the day. I decided to turn his plan against him, deliberately creating a situation to leave Chen-mu more unsettled instead of certain. I let a fake text message show on my phone screen right as Chen-mu glanced over. The instant he froze, something crossed his face that wasn't quite suspicion, it looked closer to real hurt. I paused for a second, caught off guard by that reaction. Maybe underneath all the calculation, there was still something in him that wasn't entirely fake. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, refusing to dwell on it further. Zhu Yan met Chen-mu at a small cafe far from the office, his tone more urgent than usual. "We can't wait any longer. We need to move sooner than planned," Zhu Yan said, fingers tapping impatiently on the table. "If he keeps getting closer to Lu Heng, this gets harder to control." Chen-mu stayed quiet for a long moment, clearly torn. "But if we move now and it goes wrong," Zhu Yan cut him off, frowning. "There's no other choice left." I arranged for a convenient slip to happen at just the right time, leaving an unfinished document out on my desk while I stepped away for a few minutes. I watched from a distance through the glass wall as Chen-mu hesitated, glancing around before approaching my desk. His eyes locked on the open file. I walked in right on cue, feigning surprise. "Looking for something?" Chen-mu startled and hastily made up a clumsy excuse. I let it slide with a smile, but I knew clearly the trap I'd set had just been sprung. The next day, the fake document I deliberately left out surfaced in the hands of our rival division, complete with a few small edits only Chen-mu would know how to make. I quietly gathered the evidence, cross-checking every detail to make sure there was no mistake. Every trace pointed to one person. I sat in my office, staring at the completed file of evidence in front of me. There was no more doubt now. I held solid proof of Chen-mu's betrayal. I deliberated for a long time before deciding not to expose Chen-mu right away, partly for strategy, keeping the card for a more decisive moment. But partly, I wasn't ready to admit to myself that I wasn't yet prepared to watch the look on his face when the truth finally broke him. I locked the evidence away somewhere safe, continuing to act as if nothing had changed. I told myself it was simply a smart calculation, even as I knew the line between reason and feeling was blurring more with each passing day. That evening, I ran into Gu Zi in an empty hallway on my way out of the office. He stopped, looking at me with a rare gentleness, his voice soft. "You've seemed exhausted lately. If something's weighing on you, tell me. I might be able to help." I smiled and thanked him, but a strange feeling stirred inside me at the unexpected concern. Something in the way he said it kept me from fully accepting it. That night, I sat with my notes and added a line confirming it. The proof of Chen-mu's betrayal was now firmly in my hands. I crossed his name off the top of my priority list and shifted my focus to the next name. Zhu Yan, growing more impatient and careless by the day, would be my next target. I folded the paper closed, a determined glint in my eyes. The game was entering a new stage. Zhu Yan suddenly launched an aggressive move for the quarter's biggest project, openly proposing to take over as lead in front of the entire company. "I think it's time for a fresh direction," Zhu Yan said, his sharp gaze fixed on me without flinching. "Not everyone is capable of carrying this kind of responsibility." I sat quietly, watching him present. There was something different about this intensity, sharper than the casual mockery from my last life, as if Zhu Yan were pouring everything into this fight, not just trying to drag me down. I didn't react rashly the way I had before, instead quietly preparing a completely different proposal, one built to exploit the exact weaknesses in his strategy. When it was my turn, I laid out a detailed analysis, pointing out every flaw in his plan without raising my voice or attacking him personally. The room listened in silence. Zhu Yan gripped his pen tighter, unable to hide his surprise. This wasn't the familiar clash we'd always had, and I could tell he sensed the shift just as clearly as I did. Lu Heng listened to both presentations, his expression giving nothing away. In the end, he made his decision based on practical feasibility, unintentionally leaning toward my proposal. "This one has stronger data behind it," Lu Heng said simply, without further explanation. Zhu Yan gave me a long, deep look, not the resentment I'd expected, but something harder to name. I faltered for a moment under that gaze, then quickly pulled my focus back, refusing to read into it further. After the meeting, Zhu Yan went straight to Gu Zi's office, still visibly frustrated. "He's changed too much, nothing like before," Zhu Yan said, dropping into the chair across from him. "I need advice. How do I take back control?" Gu Zi poured tea, his tone calm as always. "Sometimes direct confrontation isn't the smartest move. Let me help you find his real weakness." Zhu Yan nodded, not noticing the brief flash of calculation in Gu Zi's eyes. A few days later, Gu Zi carefully fed Zhu Yan a few selected details about my schedule, playing the role of the well-meaning outsider looking to help. "If you use this timing right, you'll have a much better shot," Gu Zi said gently, not a hint of manipulation in his voice. Zhu Yan took the advice with complete trust, not suspecting for a moment that the very person helping him was the one behind every conflict between the two of us. While reviewing personnel files to prepare for the new project, I stumbled onto something unexpected. Zhu Yan had spent years being consistently undervalued by the company, despite always exceeding his targets. I read through the old notes, realizing his sharpness toward me may have partly come from the pressure of constantly having to prove himself in an environment that always favored others. I sat there for a moment, my view of Zhu Yan starting to shift from what I'd originally assumed. I sought Zhu Yan out after work, proposing a straightforward partnership instead of continuing to wear each other down. "We're both being squeezed in different ways," I said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Instead of stepping on each other, why not team up so we both benefit?" Zhu Yan studied me for a long moment, suspicion mixed with a flicker of surprise at the unexpected honesty. "You really think I'll trust you that easily?" I didn't push further, just laid out a few concrete benefits the arrangement could bring to both of us. Zhu Yan waited silently for a while, fingers drumming on the table out of habit. "Fine, I'll give it a try, but if you play me, don't expect any mercy." I nodded in agreement, quietly noticing his eyes weren't as sharp as before, carrying instead the cautious edge of someone who'd just decided to bet on something uncertain. From then on, Zhu Yan and I began exchanging selective information, carefully testing each other with every small step of cooperation. On a few late nights, we both lingered longer than necessary after work, light jokes slipping in between the dry business discussions. Once, when I laughed at something he said, I caught his eyes lingering on my face a beat too long before he quickly looked away. I pretended not to notice, but quietly registered the small shift. Chen Mu noticed Zhu Yan and I had grown noticeably closer lately, watching us with visible confusion whenever we stood together. That night, Chen Mu went to report it to Gu Zi, his tone flustered. Something's off, the two of them are unusually close now, not like the rivalry before. Gu Zi narrowed his eyes, twirling his teacup slowly, a flash of quiet irritation crossing his face before settling back into his usual calm. Leave it to me. Lu Heng called me up to discuss a sensitive part of the project, this time without Gu Zi or anyone else present. The atmosphere in the room felt different this time, more relaxed and private. Lu Heng poured me a cup of tea, a small gesture that caught me off guard. "You've been doing excellent work lately," he said, his tone carrying something close to genuine praise, rare for him. I smiled and thanked him, an unfamiliar warmth rising at the rare compliment. During the conversation, Lu Heng casually brought up a detail about a rainy night from years ago, describing it with a precision that stopped me cold. It was a night from my last life, when I'd stood waiting outside the company for a long time, hoping someone would notice I was struggling. But as I remembered it, no one had ever shown up that night. I stared at him, trying to press for more, but Lu Heng just furrowed his brow as if trying to recall something hazy, then quickly changed the subject. That night I couldn't sleep, my mind stuck on the detail Lu Heng had let slip. If he really had been there that rainy night, why didn't my memory show anyone at all? Could it be that I'd misunderstood something important about this man in my last life? I sat up, pulled out my old notes, and started cross-checking the timeline. A new possibility began forming in my mind, one that shook everything I thought I knew about Lu Heng. Zhu Yan spotted me looking distracted during work and pulled up a chair beside me, his tone unusually serious. "I'd be careful with Lu Heng if I were you," Zhu Yan said, avoiding my eyes. "He's not as simple as he looks. There are things you don't know yet." I asked for more, but he just shook his head, refusing to elaborate, only adding one final line before standing up to leave. "Just trust me on this one." I watched him walk away, more unsettled than before. Late that night, I sat alone in the office, weighing everything that had happened recently. My alliance with Zhu Yan had stabilized for now, though plenty remained unclear. But what weighed on me most was Lu Heng and the cryptic warning I'd just received. I closed my notes, staring out into the dark window. My focus now had to shift. I needed to uncover the truth behind Lu Heng before things went any further. At first, I approached Lu Heng purely because I needed a powerful anchor to lean on in this game, with no intention of letting feelings get involved. I deliberately created more opportunities for us to cross paths, from work reports to showing up right when he needed someone reliable. He kept his usual cool distance, but gradually started handing me more important responsibilities, even quietly stepping in to defend me a few times when I was targeted in internal meetings. One late night at the office, I discovered a serious error in a financial report that could have gotten me wrongly blamed if left unresolved. I scrambled to fix it well past midnight, not expecting Lu Heng to still be there, quietly stepping in to help correct the entire dataset without a word of criticism. "Be more careful next time," was all he said, his tone as detached as ever. But I could tell that small act said far more than any comforting words could. I remembered clearly in my last life, at this exact same point, I had begged Lu Heng for help in a similarly desperate situation, only to be met with cold silence and a look as distant as a stranger's. The difference between the two lives left me unsettled. Could it be that the choices I'd made differently this time around had somehow changed the way he treated me? I sat alone in the empty office, feeling the line between past and present blur more than ever. With the atmosphere between us feeling more open, I tried probing gently about that year, bringing up a situation deliberately similar to what had happened in my last life. "If someone once needed your help and you never showed up, would you regret it?" I asked, keeping my tone light as if just making conversation. Lu Heng paused for a second, something unreadable flickering in his eyes before he answered calmly, "Depends on the circumstances at the time." The vague answer only made me more curious. But before I could push further, he quickly steered the conversation back to a work report, his avoidance more obvious than usual. I noticed that every time I touched that sensitive corner of memory, he reacted in a way that broke from his usual composure at work. I didn't press further, just quietly noted the reaction, certain this couldn't be a simple coincidence. A few days later, a small incident nearly occurred at the project launch event, eerily close to a dangerous situation I remembered from my last life. My chest tightened as I recognized the matching details, down to the exact position and timing. On instinct, I stepped back, scanning the room with heightened alertness. Tension gripped the hall for a few brief seconds, my hands clenching as I braced for the worst possible outcome. Right as I was scrambling to handle the situation, Lu Heng moved fast, stepping directly in front of me and giving the security team a sharp, decisive order to act. Unlike last time, he didn't hesitate or stand back to watch. He protected me with a resolve I'd never seen before. I stood behind him, my heart still racing from the danger, but what overwhelmed me most was pure shock at the sudden, unexpected change in him. After the incident, Lu Heng brought me into a private room to calm down, a trace of worry still lingering in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice noticeably softer than usual. I shook my head, trying to stay composed, but in that moment, I realized the line between using him as an anchor and something far more genuine was starting to fade. I quickly lowered my head, avoiding his gaze too long, afraid it would give away the way I was wavering inside. News of Lu Heng personally protecting me in front of everyone spread quickly through the company, and both Zhu Yan and Chen Mu noticed the unusual closeness between us. Zhu Yan gave me a searching look over lunch, saying nothing, but his eyes carried something hard to name. Chen Mu stayed quieter than usual, a distant edge to his behavior. I could feel it. The complicated web of relationships around me was entering a new, more sensitive and unpredictable phase. Gu Zi was the first to openly show irritation, if only for a brief moment, catching Lu Heng standing closer to me than necessary during a meeting. "Seems like you've been paying a lot more attention to him lately." Gu Zi remarked lightly, but with an edge, his eyes flicking to me before turning to Lu Heng. Lu Heng said nothing, simply continuing his work as if he hadn't heard. But I caught the brief stiffness in Gu Zi's expression, a rare crack in his usual composure. I noted that strange moment from Gu Zi, filing it away without yet being able to connect it to anything concrete. He had always presented himself as calm, harmless, standing outside every conflict. So why would one small moment involving Lu Heng and me be enough to crack that perfect exterior? I reminded myself to watch more closely from now on. Something told me Gu Zi wasn't as simple as he appeared. During a private conversation, Lu Heng suddenly mentioned that he'd once quietly looked into the reason behind my termination and disappearance from the company. At a time I had never told anyone about. I froze, forcing my face to stay calm while my mind reeled. That was exactly what had happened in my last life, the moment I'd vanished in despair with no one the wiser. "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Lu Heng looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Just a feeling I needed to look into it. "I'm not sure why." The vague answer only convinced me further that Lu Heng was holding on to more than he let on, likely tied directly to the secrets of the loop I was living through. I began reevaluating everything I'd assumed about him from the start, wondering whether his coldness in my last life had truly come from indifference, or hidden something far deeper I'd never known. My trust in him, once built purely on calculation, was starting to take on an entirely different weight. That night, I decided to speak with him directly without any more circling or probing. "I feel like you're hiding something from me," I said, meeting his eyes without looking away. "If we want to trust each other, maybe it's time to be honest." Lu Heng stayed quiet for a while, then let out a soft sigh. "You're right. I've suspected something wasn't right for a long time now. I just hadn't found the right moment to say it." Lu Heng slowly explained that at some point in the past, someone had deliberately fed him false information, leading him to misunderstand and pull away from someone important, for reasons he never fully understood. At the time, I didn't understand why I believed something so unreasonable. He said, his tone carrying a rare weight of regret. Looking back now, I think someone deliberately orchestrated all of it. I listened, quietly piecing together the picture of what had truly happened in the past he was referring to. The scattered pieces started coming together more clearly in my mind. If Lu Heng had been manipulated into misunderstanding and pulling away from me, then someone had to be behind it, pulling the strings. I ran through my mental list of suspects, my thoughts landing longest on the one name that had always seemed the most perfect, the most harmless. I couldn't be certain yet, but something told me the truth behind all this tragedy was closer than I'd ever imagined. After that late-night conversation, the distance between Lu Heng and me seemed to close noticeably. The quiet moments between us no longer felt awkward, but strangely comfortable. Once, when I let my exhaustion show after a long, stressful day, he quietly rested a hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, just a simple, comforting gesture. I looked up and caught him watching me with a rare tenderness. In that moment, I knew whatever was between us had stopped being purely calculated a long time ago. Meanwhile, Chen Mu, cornered by both Zhu Yan and his own growing guilt, finally decided to make one last, reckless move to protect his position before things spiraled out of control. He quietly prepared a major act of sabotage, aimed straight at the key project Lu Heng and I were now leading together, hoping to turn the tables before he was fully exposed. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face as he prepared to act, but in the end, he went through with the plan. Chen Mu's scheme was quickly caught by Lu Heng and me working together, stopped in time before it could cause real damage. Faced with undeniable evidence, Chen Mu finally broke down, admitting everything through tears and long overdue remorse. I looked at him, a tangle of emotions rising inside me, bitter and relieved all at once now that everything was finally out in the open. Afterward, Lu Heng and I stood together by the large office window, the air between us warmer than it had ever been. "We're officially allies now," I said, a small smile crossing my face as I glanced at him. He turned to look at me, a tenderness in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just allies. My heart skipped at those words. Whatever had started as calculation between us was now unmistakably clear and unmistakably real. I sat with Lu Heng in his office, laying out every piece of the puzzle we'd gathered. Zhu Yan's cryptic warning, the detail about Lu Heng being manipulated into misunderstanding, and Gu Zi's brief, uncharacteristic show of irritation. Together, we pieced the fragments back together, slowly realizing one common thread ran through everything. Gu Zi's shadow lingered behind it all. My grip tightened, a cold chill running down my spine at the realization that the person I'd been the least wary of might be the greatest threat all along. Lu Heng shared more sensitive internal information, revealing that Gu Zi had only recently been brought in as his close assistant, with a background that had never been thoroughly checked. "I trusted him too easily without verifying anything," Lu Heng said, a rare note of self-reproach in his voice. I placed a hand on his shoulder to steady him. "It's not too late to know now, let's find the truth together." We looked at each other, sharing the same resolve. I made a point to approach Gu Zi, deliberately dropping a loaded question into what seemed like an innocent conversation about recent project progress. "Things have been unusually chaotic lately. Makes you wonder who's been orchestrating it all so smoothly," I said, watching his expression closely. Gu Zi simply smiled, calm as ever. "Probably just coincidence. Big companies always have their share of chaos." The answer was so flawless it left no room for doubt, which only strengthened my suspicion further. I left the conversation and relayed every detail to Lu Heng. "The more perfect it is, the more suspicious it gets," I said. Anyone normal would show some kind of reaction, but Gu Zi showed nothing at all. Lu Heng nodded in agreement, his gaze sharpening. "Then we need concrete evidence, not just instinct." Chen Mu, still weighed down by guilt after being exposed, came to me unexpectedly, his voice shaking with remorse. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, avoiding my eyes. The one actually pulling the strings from the start wasn't Zhu Yan, it was Gu Zi. Zhu Yan was just another piece on his board. I froze at the revelation, quickly memorizing every detail he shared, the full picture finally starting to take shape. Lu Heng and I cross-referenced everything. Chen Mu's confession, Gu Zi's strange reactions, and the unverified gaps in his background. Every piece of evidence pointed to a single name. Gu Zi had orchestrated the entire chain of events, manipulating Chen Mu, provoking Zhu Yan, and planting the misunderstanding that once drove Lu Heng away from me. I looked at Lu Heng, and we both fell silent for a long moment, letting the truth settle in. Scattered fragments of my past life memory suddenly surged back, and looking at them now, everything took on an entirely different shade. In my last life too, Gu Zi had played the exact same role, always lurking behind the scenes, orchestrating every crisis without leaving a single trace until it was already too late to undo. A chill ran through me as I realized, from the very first loop, Gu Zi had always been the one pulling the strings behind my tragedy. Through a few old connections, Lu Heng uncovered Gu Zi's true motive. Years ago, the Gu family business had been crushed by the Lu family in a brutal power struggle, collapsing entirely. "He probably sees me as the target to destroy, to avenge his family," Lu Heng said, his voice lowering. "And you were likely just the most effective tool for reaching my weak point." Hearing that only strengthened my resolve to end this once and for all. Not long after, Gu Zi realized he'd been found out, and the calm facade he'd maintained all along began to crack. He came to find me himself, no longer wearing his usual gentle expression, but a coldness I'd never seen before. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said, his tone eerily calm. I stood my ground, unshaken by the sudden shift. "Then I suppose it's time to end this game." Gu Zi didn't rush to strike, choosing instead to plant doubt with sharp, calculated words, reopening old wounds between Lu Heng and me. "Are you sure Lu Heng is being sincere, or is he just using you as another piece in his family's power game?" Gu Zi asked, watching my reaction closely. "Oh right, you still don't know, do you? Everything he's told you, the rainy night, the disappearance, all of it. I planted those memories in him myself over months. A small bit of manipulation to make the two of you trust each other faster, and to make it easier for me to watch." I paused for a second, then quickly steadied myself. I trust what I've witnessed with my own eyes, not the words of someone who makes a habit of manipulating people. Gu Zi turned his pressure onto Zhu Yan, threatening to expose his past misdeeds unless he continued working against Lu Heng and me. Zhu Yan stood caught between two impossible choices, his face tight with conflict. "I don't want to be dragged into this anymore," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Gu Zi gave a cold smile. "You don't have many options left." Zhu Yan clenched his fists, a flicker of rare resolve crossing his face. That night, Zhu Yan came to see me, having decided firmly to stand on my side despite Gu Zi's threats. "I'm helping you, and not because of our old arrangement," Zhu Yan said, meeting my eyes with a seriousness I'd never seen from him. "It's because I genuinely don't want to see you get hurt." I was caught off guard by the rare sincerity, nodding my thanks. In that moment, I realized his feelings for me might be more real than I'd ever let myself believe. Chen Mu also came forward, offering to help make up for what he'd done, his eyes still carrying the weight of guilt he hadn't shaken. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything anymore," he said, voice breaking, "but if there's anything I can do to make it right, I want to try." I looked at him for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right, I'll give you a chance." Chen Mu looked up, relief and gratitude flickering across his face. Realizing his plan to divide us had failed, Gu Zi decided to strike harder, deliberately orchestrating a dangerous situation nearly identical to the setting of my death in my last life. I received a fake message supposedly from Lu Heng, urgently asking to meet at the exact building where I'd once let myself fall. A wave of unease rose in me, but I went anyway, on high alert. I stepped into that all-too-familiar building, feeling as though I were walking straight back into the fateful moment that had once ended my life. On the rooftop, Guzi was already waiting, his eyes cold and finally stripped of every pretense. "This is where your story was always meant to end," he said, his tone unnervingly calm. "This time I won't let you escape that fate again." I stood tall, my gaze steady, showing no fear. "Then let's see today who's really the one who has to pay." The final confrontation had begun. Guzi stepped closer, his eyes never leaving me, his tone still calm and cold. "Last time you fell in despair and no one ever knew. This time will be no different." I stepped back, keeping a safe distance, scanning quickly for any way out. "You're wrong. This time I'm not alone." Guzi gave a cold smirk, taking another step toward me, unshaken by my certainty. Right as the danger peaked, the rooftop door burst open and Lu Heng rushed in, planting himself firmly between me and Guzi. "Stay away from him," Lu Heng said, his voice sharp and commanding, a stark contrast to his usual composure. Guzi's brow twitched at the unexpected arrival, but he quickly regained his calm. I stood behind Lu Heng, feeling the steady warmth of him shielding me from the danger, a sense of safety washing over me like never before. Chen Mu arrived right after, out of breath from sprinting up to the rooftop, a stack of documents clutched in his hand. "I have full evidence that Guzi orchestrated everything from the start," he said, his voice still shaky but his eyes fierce with resolve. "This time I won't run from this." Guzi turned to look at him, shock and fury flashing across his face at the betrayal he hadn't seen coming. At the same moment, Zhu Yan appeared, leading company security to seal off the only way down from the rooftop. "There's no way out for you now," Zhu Yan said, his tone hard and unyielding. "Everything you've done, we have the witnesses and the proof." Guzi looked around, realizing he was completely surrounded, his face showing panic for the first time instead of his usual composure. Faced with undeniable proof, Guzi finally dropped his flawless mask, admitting to the entire scheme he'd spent years carefully building. "Yes, I orchestrated all of it," he said, his voice bitter and cold. "My family's business collapsed because of the Lu family. I was only reclaiming what I saw as justice in my own way. Even those coincidental memories Lu Heng told you about, those were mine too, planted so you'd trust him even more, so you'd fall exactly into the story I wanted." Lu Heng looked at him, a mix of grief and fury in his eyes at having his own memories used against him. Revenge was never going to give you back what you lost. Security moved in and restrained Guzi, leading him away, powerless against the overwhelming evidence stacked against him. I watched his figure disappear, feeling none of the satisfaction I once imagined I would, only a quiet relief tangled with something close to regret. The tragic loop that had haunted me for so long had finally, truly come to an end. The rooftop fell quiet as everyone slowly cleared out, leaving only Lu Heng and me standing in the stillness. He turned to look at me, a rare softness in his eyes. "It's finally over." I nodded, relief spreading through my entire body. Lu Heng gently took my hand, saying nothing more, just pulling me closer. I looked up and met his gaze, full of genuine warmth, without a trace of calculation left. In that moment, every last doubt melted away completely. A few days later, Chen Mu came to see me one last time before leaving the company for good, guilt still lingering in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve to be fully forgiven," he said, his voice breaking, "but I'm truly sorry for everything I did." I looked at him, no longer holding on to resentment, only a quiet, gentle understanding. "I accept your apology. I hope you find a better path." Zhu Yan stayed on at the company, keeping his place as a close colleague, though something unspoken still flickered in his eyes whenever he saw Lu Heng and me standing together. "Congratulations on finding real happiness," Zhu Yan said, his smile a little forced but genuine all the same. I smiled back and thanked him, quietly grateful for the feelings he'd never put into words. He turned and walked away, his steps noticeably lighter than the sharp, guarded person I'd once known. I stood by the office window, looking out at the familiar city skyline, Lu Heng beside me, his hand gently holding mine. I realized the fated loop that had haunted me through so many past lives was finally, truly over. All the pain, the betrayal, the tears of the past had become nothing more than memory now. I looked up at him and smiled softly. From now on, we're the ones writing the story, no more loops. The loop has closed, Gu Zi has paid the price, and Jiang Bei finally walks off that rooftop hand in hand with Lu Heng, the same rooftop that once witnessed 9 of his deaths. But throughout the entire journey, the line between calculation and real feeling was never truly clear. Jiang Bei first approached Lu Heng purely out of a need for power, a way to survive. And even in their gentlest moments together, one question kept hanging in the air. Was it real love or simply the smartest bet Jiang Bei ever made? One that just happened to align with what his heart wanted to believe. As for Zhu Yan and Chen Mu, the two who carried the most genuine feelings that were never returned, they chose to quietly step back without a single word of resentment. If you were in their shoes, do you believe Jiang Bei truly loved Lu Heng from the start? Or was it still just a survival gamble that happened to touch something real?